Oh, this is Brian Lysing with Financial Brokerage, and you're here for the webinar Rethink Guarantees, what your clients are missing. For those of you that might not be familiar with financial brokerage, we are a national marketing organization working with producers nationwide in the areas of life insurance, annuities, long-term care, disability income insurance, critical illness, and Medicare supplements. Today, I'm your host from the Life Department, and we're going to talk a little bit about guarantees as applied to universal life contracts. You know, we're used to selling GULs. If we want to give clients permanent coverage, it's going to last their lifetime. But lately we've been asking the question, well, do we really need to? Are we perhaps asking people to pay for features that they may never really need? Are there some other options out there to consider? And there are several carriers that we work with here at Financial Brokerage that have ULs that take this slightly different approach to give our clients some additional options other than what we have traditionally presented to them. And our friends at AIG have put together an entire webinar revolving around this topic. So that's what we're going to go through today. Right, as I mentioned earlier, GUL may still be the best choice for some clients, but some clients out there may be very open to a newer form of index universal life. This is one that has a protection focus and some strong guarantees. Oftentimes we think of IUL for the cash accumulation and distribution features that brings to the table, but there might be another way to present IUL. Look at if your clients want coverage for a long period of time, they want to look at some form of permanent life insurance. So you'd be selling them term insurance. It's guaranteed. We know that there's a guaranteed premium and there's a guaranteed death benefit up to a specified age. And we also know that hey, it's pretty easy, right? You pay X amount, you have X amount of coverage for X number of years. So it makes it very easy to explain to a client. Well, let's take a look at IUL. Maybe it has some of the same features. Well, it is permanent coverage. Is it guaranteed? Well, there are some guarantees in IULs. We usually don't dwell on those, but that's what we're going to cover today. And is it easy to explain? I'm very familiar with it. I think it is, and I think you will too by the end of this webinar. So let's back it up a bit, though, and look at the history of universal life, because this is just a different type of universal life. ULs came about in the late 1970s. And they were really designed as an alternative to underperforming whole life policies. Interest rates were high at that time, and the industry decided that they should let consumers take advantage of that. Well, a few years go by, and as interest rates dropped, we saw the rise of variable universal life. The stock market was doing well, and the industry responded with universal life that based the interest rate on market performance. Now, we all know what happened to the market. In fact, after every market cycle, it goes up and then it goes down. So we saw the advent of GULs right about the year 2000s when those first began to be developed by the insurance companies. And again, GUL was a response to what had happened with the market-based policies previously. Now you fast forward just a few more years, and we started to see the rise of the index universal life. So now we saw policies that gave clients some of the upside potential of the market, but without any of the downside risk. And that brings us to today, where we're starting to see companies roll out protection-focused IULs. As I mentioned earlier, these aren't geared so much for the cash accumulation and distribution, although those are features. They sort of blend both of these more recent UL products into one where we've got some strong guarantees, maybe not a lifetime guarantee, and we also have some strong cash accumulation. Now, since these products are still universal life contracts, they're built on the same chassis, and if you get down to the very basics, they're really built the same. In fact, we might think of this as think of the universal life contract like driving to the top of a mountain road, right? You don't always go straight on these things; you have to follow the curves. But in this case, the mountain represents the climbing cost of insurance within the policy. Now, most permanent plans would take the policy to the very peak of our mountain here, all the way to age 121 as far as the more gas you're going to need. Now, we're going to start out the policy just like we would a trip up the mountain. We've got to put some gas in our tank or we're not going to get very far. However, our little car only holds so much gas, and our policy is not going to be able to make it to the top on premiums alone. So we're going to see some interest credited to the policy. And now that interest is going to help our policy go a lot farther than where it would get with just the premiums themselves. That helps account for the climbing cost of insurance within the universal life contract. Now, what would happen though if the interest credited isn't enough to get us to the top, right? We've seen this in the past where the projected rates were one thing and the actual rates were another thing, and then the policies didn't last as long as expected. So what happens if that accumulation account runs out of gas? Well, hey, what if we had a spare tank? And this is exactly what we've seen for years inside the GUL contracts. They all have some sort of continuation guarantee account. Some companies refer to it as a shadow account. I like to think of these things as an iceberg floating in the ocean, right? The part of the iceberg that you see above the surface of the water, that's what's in your account. What you see below the water, though, is the equivalent of this continuation guarantee account. It's the spare tank that's going to help you if the interest isn't enough to get you to the very top. Now, it doesn't have to be age 121, depending on how you craft the GUL. It could guarantee really any age that you want. Now, AIG has a couple of products that have these continuation guarantee accounts. The Secure Lifetime GUL, we've been familiar with that one for a number of years, I should say. It's one of the more competitive GULs out there. But they also have the Value Plus Protector IUL that has an account. So let's take a look at these two options here. And in this example, we're going to look at a 50-year-old male. We're going to assume he's a preferred non-smoker, and he wants to 20-pay the contract, so he's done at age 70. We're going to look at both of these products. So we've got $1 million. We've got the same money going in. The product in the green, that's our GUL, and the product in the blue is our Value Plus Protector IUL with some strong guarantees. Again, we can see those guarantees right here. We chose to guarantee the GUL to age 100. Same premium, guarantees to age 88 on the Value Plus Protector. Keep in mind, that's life expectancy. Policy runs out at 100 on the GUL because that's as far as we guaranteed it. It doesn't run out on the IUL because we're able to use that index account to build our cash value over time. In fact, in year 20, we've got significantly more cash value in the IUL for the same premiums going in as we did into the GUL. Our death benefit at age 101, well, it's run out because we only paid in enough money to guarantee to 100 on the GUL, but the same money going into the IUL still gives us, actually, it gives us an increased death benefit, almost double where we started. And if we do make it all the way to age 121, we're now at over a $6 million death benefit. So there's tremendous value in putting the same dollars into an IUL with strong guarantees. Now let's take a look at the market impact on these two options. We're going to really take this same idea and look at it from a little different angle. Um, if you look at a traditional GUL, like the Secure Lifetime GUL 3, um, we have very little accumulation potential in this contract. Contrast that with the Value Plus Protector, and this one has been dialed down on the continuation guarantee, that spare tank. If you can look at that there, we don't have nearly as much premium going to pay for that. However, we have tremendous upside potential for credited interest on the accumulation account. So that allows the client to take advantage of an increasing market. So again, on the GUL, in a 0% market, our policy would lapse at age 101. In a 5.6% market, the policy still lapses at age 101. Right? The client, even though the market is increasing, it has no effect on the client's policy, no impact on the policy. Now, the same premium and death benefit into the IUL, in a 0% market, policy would lapse at age 89, which takes our client to life expectancy. In a 5.6% market, the policy will mature at 121 for $6.3 million. So market performance will have a strong, strong impact on the IUL product. Now, let's sort of unpack that last slide there. What does it really mean to have a 0% market? Well, with the IUL, it ties the interest crediting rate to an index like the S&P 500. Now, for the IUL to credit 0% in any year, the underlying index would have to experience a negative return for that year. So if the index returns -10 for the year, 0% is credited to the account for that year. Now, in an example you're going to see here shortly, there are 38 years from policy issue for our 50-year-old until this guarantee of age 88. So therefore, to realize that that guarantee to 88 and the 0% crediting, the S&P would have to generate negative returns for all 38 years before this would even become a reality. So do we, again, is this good enough for our client? Do we really need that full age 121 guarantee? Because, I mean, this is a worst case scenario here, right? I don't think the S&P has ever generated 38 years of negative returns, and that's what would have to happen here. And I think we're going to be able to prove that to you here shortly. So how often has the S&P 500 returned a negative? Well, going back to 1927, that gives us 90 years of data. The S&P has returned 29 negative years. That's 32% of the time, or about a third of the time. Now, what about consecutive negative years? Because that's what we had in our example, right? 38 consecutive negative years. Well, there were 4 negative years consecutive from 1929 until 1932, right in the middle of the Great Depression. What about the worst 30-year time period, right? So that we're going to get our 50-year-old up to age 80. What would be the worst historical time period ever? Well, that worst time period was actually a positive return of 2.8%. So in the recorded history of the S&P 500, there has never been a 30-plus year time period of negative results. Now, how bad would it have to be to get a 30-plus year negative return? Let's look at some of the worst markets in U.S. history. This is going back well before 1929. There was the Long Depression in the late 1800s. There were 6 years of down markets. The Great Depression, which we already mentioned, 10 years of mostly down markets. The dot-com bubble burst right around the year 2000. We saw 3 years of down markets. And then the Great Recession that we just got out of here recently, 3 years of mostly down markets. These are the worst markets in U.S. history. And if we look at those, most of them, well, the more recent ones have been 3 years. The long one there, the Great Depression, 10 years. So how bad would it have to be to get a 30-year negative return? Let's look again at the most recent 90 years of the S&P 500. And here we can see all those financial crises laid out on the timeline for us. Look, in order for this hypothetical 50-year-old's policy to only last to the guaranteed age of 88, it is not quite conservative enough for your GUL clients. Well, what conservative rate should you illustrate in the IUL for your GUL clients? Well, let's take a look at that. We're going to look back at the last 90 years of the S&P 500. Again, we're looking for a conservative illustration rate because we're dealing with clients who want some safety and we want to play it safe. Now, let's take a look at the worst 30-year period in that history. And that takes us to the start of the Great Depression, the worst 30 years. We can see it in detail here. Still a lot of up years in that time period. What if we calculated the total return for the worst 30 years, the last 90 of the S&P 500? And this is a figure we saw earlier. You'd actually have a 2.8% positive return. Now, since we're not participating in the downside of the market with an index product, our client in the IUL is not going to receive 2.8%. With this particular product with AIG, they have a 9% cap right now on the index strategy. That means we're capped at 9% in the positive years, and we receive none of the downside in the negative years. So the returns would end up looking a lot like this, right? We've taken out the negatives. By doing that, we change our total return from 2.8% now to 4.5%. We haven't quite doubled it, but we're getting close. So what if we use this rate in the IUL, right? It's a conservative rate. It's not as high as what the illustration allows for. We're going to look at something that would mimic the worst 30-year time period in the last century or so. Well, here's our original illustration showing the illustrated rate in the software today. Here's what happens if we add in that historical worst 30-year time period. We still have $1 million. We're putting in 14 grand a year. We still guarantee to age 88. In this case, the policy would run out, though, at age 112, which is well beyond the life expectancies of most Americans. We still have over $300,000 of cash in year 20. Our death benefit stays at $1 million at age 101. And of course, it would run out prior to age 121, but the only people living that long are in the Guinness Book of World Records. So our IUL, with some minimal guarantees, outlasts the historical worst case scenario with significant cash value in year 20. Here's another way to visualize this. Let's take a look back at our mountain this time. And we've got our traditional GUL, and we've got our IUL with some strong guarantees. So what if we ran this scenario through and looked at the longest, biggest depression ever, this depression that has never happened, right? 0% for 30 plus years. Well, let's see what happens to both of these products. If that happens, our IUL takes us to age 90, again, to life expectancy under a scenario that has never before happened. Now, what if we look at the worst 30 years in history? This is probably more historically accurate if you're looking for a worst case scenario, right? So if we look at apply the worst 30 years in S&P 500 history to the same products, now our GUL still only goes to age 100, and our IUL takes us clear to age 112. And if we look at the current illustrated rate, which I've done a lot of research into these, and this is very accurate, if not conservative, in my opinion. Our policy matures at age 121 for over $6 million while our GUL still ends at age 100. So to recap, why do you sell GUL? Well, it's permanent and it has guarantees. Well, why might you sell the Value Plus Protector IUL with some guarantees? Well, at a conservative rate of 4.5%, it's permanent. It has guarantees looking back at a historical worst case scenario. And is it easy? Well, if you've gone through this entire webinar to this point, I think you would agree that that it is. So here's what I want you to do next. For your next GUL case, let's look at multiple illustrations, right? Let's look at the GUL because that's what you're used to and maybe what the clients are used to. But let's also look at this Value Plus Protector with the current crediting rate using the same premium and the same death benefit. And then let's also look at this using a historical worst case scenario rate of 4.5%. Right? And after showing the GUL to the client, show them the current rate IUL illustration, including the guarantees, and show the non-guaranteed values in that 4.5% illustration, and explain to them how this reflects a historical worst case scenario. And then leave it up to your client. Look, they might still go with the GUL, they might go with the IUL with limited guarantees, or another solution that I think works great for a lot of folks is hey, let's split the difference or do some combination. It doesn't have to be 50-50. Maybe it's quarter guarantee and 3/4 IUL, some combination. But at least this way, they're not totally locked out as the market continues to go up and up and up. They can actually participate in some of that upside. So now we've got an IUL sale that is very, very easy to understand. So I'd like to thank you for joining us this morning for this webinar on rethinking the guarantees. All of us here at Financial Brokerage appreciate your business. If you have some, or when you have some clients that would be a good fit for some of these products, give us a call. We can all be reached at 800-475-5555. We'd be happy to help you discuss your client's situation, premiums, the amount of coverage that they need, and see if we can craft some illustrations that are a good fit for their situation. So appreciate your time, and hope you can join us on the next webinar. Thank you.